let's talk about Wittgenstein, because that's an ongoing interest and was a great passion of mine. My PhD, which I completed in 1984, was called The Problem of Rationality. And the problem of rationality really referred to a question about the history of reason and the forms that it takes. And in particular, in relation to education, this is a very, very important topic because now in globalization, we are looking at radical cross-cultural standards to do with rationality. And at some point, although some forms of rationality, let's say, those to do with the STEM disciplines, those to do with science, while they originate in the West, at the same time, that trajectory has become global. And there's nobody who wants to practice physics in an indigenous way. Unfortunately, there is only one way to do physics, and that's the norm referenced and peer-reviewed standards that have evolved out of the West for studying physics. Doesn't mean to say that physics is Western. But so one can see that the problem of rationality here is a very central one. And I'd say my background is in philosophy, and I came out of a philosophy department, and then I was confronted with, in New Zealand, with teaching in a classroom with particularly Indigenous people, Māori in my classrooms, who came from a Stone Age culture, I guess, who were making the transition to modernisation. And with the revival and the renaissance of Māori thought, the question is, are Western forms of rationality really only forms of imperialism? Are they really only kind of valid in terms of their own cultural terms, or do they have some kind of cross-cultural validity across cultures and so on? Now, that question really was very important to me. It's still very important to me. In fact, I think Wittgenstein still informed. I wouldn't classify myself necessarily as a Wittgensteinian because I don't go to all the international conferences on Wittgenstein, but certainly he's in the background there for many of the issues that still I write books and papers about. In particular, one of the questions comes out of Wittgenstein, one of the most anthropological philosophers, is a question about language, the origin, the acquisition, a conception of language games, which really begins to show that rationality is relative to discourse, to discourses. We can talk about not one reason, one rationality, but many rationalities. And when we come to that, that's a very big step forward for Western philosophy, that the forms of rationality are very discourse-related and disciplinary-related. Therefore, we need to understand that when we make progress in law, we do so by means of a set of standards and a set of procedures that are very different from doing high-energy particle physics, or let's say anthropology, or forms of biotechnology. At the moment, UNESCO says there are over 4,000 recognised fields. So are we talking about a splintering of rationality? We're talking about over 4,000 fields, which some of which are incommensurable with one another. So this is a very big question for me, and I guess related to that are questions in the philosophy of language, because I guess my background in philosophy, I'm known as a philosopher of education, although I reject the label, and I not only reject the label personally, but also the label philosophy of education itself, it seems to me, it needs some correction, some revision. But one of the things about that is that the analytic revolution in philosophy took place really at the hands of Wittgenstein and Russell and Frege in the early days, and then a much more anthropological conception that took place with philosophical investigations, towards the end of Wittgenstein's life. So he puts up two views. One is a concept of language and rationality, because rationality relates to language, which is a very pure model of the way in which language, particularly scientific language, enables us to describe the world. So there is a logical isomorphism between scientific statements and states of affairs in the world. And this philosophy, particularly from his work called Logico Philosophicus, Tractatus Logico Philosophicus, a Latin title suggested by Ogden to Wittgenstein, 71 pages in which he thought that he had solved all the problems of the world, and really under one paradigm he really had done that. And then a later view of his, which was much more anthropological, much more based on a concept of culture that was deeper than language. In other words, we're talking here about a notion of cultural practice, which is kind of pre-linguistic in a sense. This is the kind of interesting thing about Wittgenstein. He's very anthropological. So between these two philosophies, we have a remarkable contribution to understanding the concept of rationality as it develops in the modern West, and also in particular in relation to discipline. So you can see why this would be of interest to me as an educational thinker. And let me say also, one of the elements that springs out of Wittgenstein's anthropological work is a therapeutic notion of philosophy, because he holds this view that philosophy doesn't give us any descriptive statements about the world. All it does is to correct a series of misleading metaphors that are in the culture, and therefore it's way before Derrida, it's kind of like a deconstructive sort of logic. It enables us to practice a kind of form of therapy on ourselves. And I think ultimately the picture of education that I have is very much based on that conception.